In 2020, I had over $120,000 of student loans. But today, here where I sit, I have over $100,000 saved for a home down payment. Back then, everybody told me that this wasn't going to be possible. So today I'm going to share with you exactly how I did this and how you can do it too. Before I get into all the tactics, you need to understand where it all began. I woke up out of my debt coma in 2020 to find myself at over 6 figures of student loans. At that point, I was making a pastor's salary, but I still had hopes and dreams of having kids and getting married and fulfilling the American dream, yes, of buying a home. Several people around me who were probably just trying to encourage me and empathize with me said that buying a home just wasn't in the cards for me. But as a good seminary student, I just kept coming back to Proverbs 21 verse 5 that says, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty." And I knew that regardless of what my future looked like, I wanted to be somebody who was diligent. The Hebrew word for the word diligent is the Hebrew word harutz, and it means somebody who is decisive, somebody who pays attention. And so I wanted to be somebody who, when it came to finances, was someone who was aware of what was going on and was willing to make decisions that were hard to make. And so I pulled up my bootstraps and kind of changed my financial situation by just doing 4 simple things that I'm going to share with you today. The first thing that I did was I checked my heart. One of the things that I wrestled with as a pastor is this question: am I doing this for the right reasons? And a verse that kept coming to mind was this verse from Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. That says, "Do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal." As I asked myself that question, am I doing this for the right reasons? I kept wondering if I was motivated by trying to keep up with the Joneses or trying to feel some sort of success in my life. Is that why I'm doing this, or are there real and honest biblical reasons why I might be interested in reaching some sort of level of financial security? That being said, really every step of the house buying process, we need to be asking ourselves the question, what's my why? We need to check our hearts and make sure that the reasons why we're doing the things that we're doing with our money is not for any sort of prideful reasons. Asking questions like, am I buying a house because it's going to make me feel successful? Or am I buying a house because that's what all my friends have done? Is this about other people's perception of me, or is this something that I truly want and value? The second step is the most technical, and that's to do the math. Now, there's lots of financial advice out here in the wild world of YouTube, but most of it isn't going to take into account the biblical teaching on money. And so I'm going to share with you the math based on the scriptures that talk about it. The first math you're going to have to calculate is your down payment. And my recommendation is 20%, really for 2 reasons. The first reason is that it gives you some equity in the home, so that when you turn around in 5 to 7 years and sell that to go buy a different house in a different state, whatever your circumstances are, you have some money that you can retrieve from that and put into another down payment. But the second reason is the real kicker, and that's that in a high interest rate market, if you don't put 20% down on a house, your monthly mortgage payment is going to be way above the recommendation that I'm about to give you. In Proverbs 22:27, the author is talking about somebody who is thinking about taking on a big debt. And the author says, if you have nothing with which to pay, why should your bed be taken from under you? In other words, when we consider taking on debts that are just unreasonably risky or include a monthly payment that we simply can't afford within reason, using this rhetorical question, he's challenging us with this idea that it's not worth it. That even the idea of getting into a home isn't worth it if your monthly payment isn't going to be something that's going to be below this recommended number that I'm about to give you. And the number that we're aiming for when it comes to how much we can spend on a monthly mortgage is going to be something less than 30% of our take-home pay. Now, as countercultural as this is, it is so important that we keep our monthly mortgage below that 30% mark, because when too much of our income is going into our mortgage, we lose all financial flexibility. There are so many people out there who have such a high percentage of their income going towards their mortgage that they've lost all flexibility to invest in their retirement, to invest in their kids' education, or to plan for the future. And before you say, man, there's no way that I could get my monthly mortgage payment to below 30% of my income, one factor that totally changes this and makes it a lot more accessible is this last bit of math that we're about to do. And that is the question, how big a house? Where I live, any standalone single family home is anywhere north of $750,000. But if instead you're willing to reduce the size of your house, and instead of getting a standalone single family home, maybe I instead purchase a townhouse, that reduces that bottom line to $550,000. And if even that is still too high for you, you can get a condo for about $450,000. So noting the difference between the $750,000 standalone single-family home and the $450,000 condo, it's easy to see how if you just adjust the size of a house that you're interested in, you can get your monthly mortgage payment well below 30% of your take-home pay. So me and my wife did all of these calculations. We started off determining that 20% was the amount that we wanted to put down. Then we decided what size of a house we could afford, and we made sure that we could afford that monthly mortgage with our income. Knowing that condos are about $450,000 and the townhouse was about $550,000, we figured that we would need a down payment of somewhere around $100,000, which brought us to the next step of liking and subscribing. And shortly after we liked and subscribed, the system. The system answers the question, how? How did we end up actually saving $100,000 for a down payment on a house? And the first thing that we did was we lived on less. We started off by renting the cheapest apartment we could possibly find in the area. We bought 10-year-old cards in order to get us to and from work, but that's it. We didn't go on vacations. We didn't buy nice clothes. We didn't go out to eat. We really didn't spend any money at all on our wants. And this itself truly has been such a cheat code that me and my wife live on somewhere around 25% of our income and are able to save and invest 70% of our take-home pay. And all this is only possible because as Christians, we've learned what it means to be content. In Philippians chapter 4, Paul says exactly that. He says, I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. And just to be frank, if you're in a season of life where you already have a mortgage and you have kids and you have other responsibilities, things like this become a lot more difficult because, being able to rent or have a house that has multiple rooms in it is no longer a want, now it's a need. Similarly, there's all sorts of different expenditures that come your way that become necessary in different seasons of life. But if you're young and you're able to, and even if you have kids and a mortgage, if you work hard at living on less, the opportunities financially that come your way are endless. The next part of the system was to increase our income. Over the last 6 years, me and my wife have been able to increase our income significantly. This included my wife going to get a bunch of certifications in her field of work. It also included me going back to get a master's and once again going back to do the doctorate that I'm in the middle of. And even on top of those things, we still found time in our schedule, and so we started a bunch of side gigs. Very few of those are actually profitable yet, but still yet we're working hard to increase our income. Colossians 3:23 says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. The last thing we did in the system is we maintained our lifestyle. In other words, over the years, as our pay has increased and our side gigs have become slowly more and more profitable, we're living in the same way. We're not changing our habits, we're not eating out more, spending more on clothes, or buying houses or cars. Instead, we're keeping everything the same and not changing a thing. That way, when we get these increases in income, we're able to immediately put it into our housing fund. And the fourth step is to invest wisely. Now, we really wanted to get to this $100,000 down payment as soon as possible, and I was tempted in multiple seasons to increase the risk of my investments for the sake of achieving that goal quicker. But as tempting as that was, I kept being reminded of the wisdom of index fund investing. So for those who don't know, index fund investing means that you're investing in a basket of stocks rather than single stocks. What this does is it diversifies your investments over hundreds and sometimes even thousands of companies, and it keeps your risk really low. Which brings us to Proverbs 13:11, which says that wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. What this looks like for me and my wife is we essentially invest in two different index funds. The first is called VTI, which is a broad market index fund. So it's kind of like the S&P 500, but instead of the top 500 companies, you're looking at somewhere around 3,500 companies. And then a very small percentage of our income goes into VGT, which is a index fund that invests in technology companies. Now, if me and my wife felt like we were going to buy a house in the next year or two, we actually wouldn't have had that money in the market at all. Instead, we would have had it in an HYSA, which is a high yield savings account. And those accounts will yield somewhere between 3 and maybe 4% if you're lucky. But since we know that our time horizon from when we would need that money is a little bit further away from us, we just decided that investing it in the stock market is wiser. Here where I sit today, me and my wife have saved well over $100,000 for a down payment on a house, yet we still haven't bought one. If you want to know why and what to do with your $100,000 once you have it, stay tuned for next week's video that I'll pin right here, where I'll answer both of those questions.